Welcome to another SEGA News Bits. SEGA News whenever it hits. I'm Barry, with me is George, and we're talking about SEGA and the legacy titles. In a recent interview with Marketing Week, SEGA Europe Marketing Director Jon Rooke answered a question pertaining to Shenmue as well as other classic series titles. Now, when this interview originally went out, there was a bit of a kind of question concerning his comments on this, because initially they didn't add the quote of what he actually said. They just sort of took what he said and then, well, here, I'll read what the article actually said. The article actually said that he said that SEGA is exploring ways to re-release the original two Shenmue titles, which was crazy that SEGA would be actually talking about this publicly. And then as fans started to read it, they were questioning, well, what did he actually say? And so finally, a SEGA fan site, not SEGA Bits, I don't know what they're called, reached out to him on Twitter, and the original writer replied that the actual quote was, "There are lots of opportunities for legacy titles. We are exploring. We know what fans want, as they have a petition." And so, well, he didn't actually talk about Shenmue or Shenmue 2. This answer did follow them talking about Shenmue 3 and the possibility of the re-releases. Do you think that he was referring to Shenmue, George, or was he just giving a typical PR response?
I think he was giving it kind of a typical PR response. I do think that Shenmue is being worked on. I know it's been in and out of SEGA, at least to almost being worked on. I think my issue with SEGA mostly is that they don't step forward all the way. They always nibble at stuff. Good examples would be the Sonic 1 and 2 on mobile,
right?
The HD, and then they just randomly stop it for no reason, even though they're selling pretty well. Then they have the Jet Set Radio that they never continued after that. Now they have the PC ports, which that's the one they're starting to continue, make it more of a yearly thing.
Yeah.
I think you have to continue doing this, and I think it's really bad that your fans have a list that you. I mean, isn't that your job as a marketing guy or as whatever, to understand your fan base? I think there's been a lot of that in SEGA right now, and I hope he's right. But we've heard this before, haven't we? Remember when they started first doing the Dreamcast titles? They told us they were gonna have some insane number, 40 before summer, and it's been 5 years, and they
in fact, here's the exact quote. Back in 2012, I guess, we'll just be totally upfront with what we know about Shenmue HD. So one of the earliest things we heard about it was in 2012. There was an interview between Game Reactor at GDC with SEGA's associate brand manager, Ben Harble. And in response to questions over what has been the most requested re-releases, he actually answered what sounded like him just admitting what the next titles were going to be. And he said, "I can tell you what'll be Shenmue, that, and Skies of Arcadia." And then he followed, "There are a couple of our most requested games. I can't say yes or no, but we may be working on them." So that was a strange quote, given he didn't just say what the most requested games are, but he said we may be working on them. As time passed, I do recall that there was a leaked image from that developer end of Xbox where you could see what upcoming games were going to be, and that's where the Sonic 4 leak came from.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact details, so I'm probably going to be the worst side of it. But yeah, even then, they all
appeared.
Yes, Shenmue, and then they had a trademark, and then they had a trademark for Skies of Arcadia. They redid the trademarks a while back during this time, and something happened, obviously, where funding was being cut, and I'm assuming that's when they restructured back in 2012.
Yeah, so the fact that they were or weren't working on the game is, I guess you could say, up for debate. I personally think they were working on it just based on these facts that we have. However, I don't think it's malicious that they're not releasing it. I know people say, you know how you can make some money, SEGA? It's easy. Just re-release the games and make money. Done. Yeah, it's that's really not how re-releases work. There's a lot of red tape you have to get through. I mean, just look at Sonic 3. There's music rights issues, which is holding them back from releasing. So if that's getting in the way of one of their most popular Sonic titles that they know will sell, and I'm sure they'd love to get it out there, I can imagine that there's something holding Shenmue back. Now, we know that the game involved several different bits of technology to make the finished product. It could be possible that some weird technical thing that led to, I don't know, Goro's hair physics is the reason why the game's not out. They don't have the rights to it, or they don't know who have the rights. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the same thing. There's a lot of companies that were involved in tie-ins. There's a lot of red tape with Shenmue. It's one of those games that it wasn't just the AM2 effort. It was like a whole company effort, you know? Sega as a company. I'm saying there's other companies that were contracted to finish bits and pieces of that game. Yeah, it's very difficult position to be in, especially when you're Sega. And I mean, like you said, they didn't even do Sonic 3 because of music issues rumored. So, yeah. and then when we did an interview with Stealth, and he even talks about how just being located outside of Japan is a little harder to get stuff done, you know, because of the language barrier and just the way that Japan is just totally different universe, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of I can see why it's been taking so long, but I think Sega has to have an effective plan. And if you're gonna do one title, don't just do one. Do one at least every year. I think that's the minimum.
Yeah, and I think they learned their lesson with the Sega Heritage Collection, because by naming it that, people expected more releases from them, and then when they were like, oh, we were just doing Sonic Adventure 2 and Jet Set Radio.
Don't worry.
You know?
I'll look for it.
Wait for me. It's also important to note, I just want to mention that other games with rights issues, Jet Set Radio had music rights issues, which caused them to have to figure all that out. Thankfully, they got most of the soundtrack intact outside of one or two songs. Crazy Taxi was a game that was re-released, and it lost its entire soundtrack, and it really hurt the game. It's the game plays the same, but the iconic music's gone. And Sega, they openly admitted that that's something that they shouldn't have done, and they went back and added the music back in for the iOS releases. But of course, contracts are different, so they can't go back in and just update your Xbox Live version and put the Offspring back in the game. There's a lot more to it than that. And I guess I'll get into it here too. Just speaking of games and rights issues, Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 are being pulled tomorrow from Xbox Live Arcade and Virtual Console, and Sega's talking about supporting their legacy titles, and they're well aware of them, and yet here they are pulling two games. Did you want to briefly talk about that?
Yeah, I think that has to do more with, I have a feeling they have something coming out for the 25th anniversary. I would hope so, to replace them. But like supporting the legacy title should be I think a big focus for Sega. Nintendo right now, that's a big focus for them, and I think we'll be seeing that coming up with that next. Like, Nintendo wants the whole family to be able to enjoy old games with their family and like keep these like IPs relevant. So much so that they're making mobile games, which they hate. And so I think Sega has to see it that way. Like, you got to keep these brands alive, even if it is just re-releasing them for newer consoles, so new families could play it, with their kids, That keeps the brand alive for those new generation of kids.
Oh, absolutely. And
especially now with the whole eBay scalping.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, I'd love to see some of the more rare games release and really bring prices down on things. So is there any more you want to add about this?
I was going to ask you a couple of questions. What do you think is a legacy title? That term could be used for like, Vanquish, that's a legacy game. Why would that be a legacy game? It came out in 2010?
Yeah.
So how old does a game have to be to become a legacy title? And how popular does it have to be a legacy title, I guess?
That's a good question. It actually goes back to the other video that you can watch that came from this interview about Sonic. What is Sonic's heyday? What is a Sega legacy title? I would say anything from 2001 and earlier feels like maybe should be considered a legacy title. Though even then, you look at some of the stuff in the early 2000s, they released some really great games. So the question is, were they legacy titles? I know Gun Valkyrie, it's a lot of fun, but it's definitely not a legacy title. Virtua Fighter, they've seen sequels as of recent, so they've at least been supporting those. I guess I'd say anyone that's like a racer in Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing is probably a legacy character. I'd say Super Monkey Ball has just recently become a legacy IP.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I would say about early 2000s. Don't be giving me a 2008 title and be like, "Hey, look at this, it's a legacy title." No, that's not legacy. I'm sorry. What titles do you think would be the most demanded by fans, in your opinion? By going, well, I mean, we spend a lot of time in the community. We understand what people want and what we see repeated over and over again.
Yeah.
What would be some of the titles that you've seen being repeated over and over again?
Well, there's the obvious ones. There's Sonic 2006. No, there's Skies of Arcadia, Shenmue 2, any of the Panzer Dragoon games. Honestly, I think Orta should be their biggest focus, because as much as I love the original Saturn games, I think Saga would be too difficult to attain, and I think the first two kind of pale in comparison to Orta. Plus, if you make an HD port of Panzer Dragoon Orta, the first game's kind of already in there. You've got that going for you. Jet Set Radio Future, I'd love to see. I'm trying to think what else. Ones that just pop off my head. But yeah, I feel like a lot of them are the ones of the Dreamcast and the early 2000 eras. That's what I'm really talking about. But there are some really great Sega CD games that I think should make a return. And I think the Sega Saturn library doesn't get as much love in the remake market. I mean, really, we've only seen Knights. I'd love to see Burning Rangers.
I think I think the reason I think the Saturn has been kind of like snubbed, I guess, not just because it just did really terrible around here in America, but also because the graphics on that era of gaming is very ugly. Let's be honest with each other. Yeah, and it's really hard to like put it to a standard of HD without it looking like a mess, because it was very low polygon. They would have to remake all the 3D graphics on the Sega Saturn titles for a new audience to even give it a double look.
That's a good point.
No, you notice that when we talk about these, like, oh, I want this game, we always go for like the 3D games, like Dreamcast era. Even though the Genesis probably has the most popular titles for like, I guess, this generation, but then would you want to see it like a stealth port where it kind of like embraces its old style for HD screens, or would you rather it like from the ground up being remade in 2D?
First off, I'd say that the reason why I'm not going for Genesis games, and I think a lot of people aren't, is because it's so easy nowadays to emulate Genesis, 32X, Sega CD, and Game Gear and Master System games. So, as fun as it would be to see those again, like on XBLA and PSN, iOS, they're so easy to emulate at home. And so I think a lot of people turn to Dreamcast and Saturn games because it's such a chore to burn them and to play them on your original hardware. And often, you're actually hurting the laser. Even then, it's a lot of fun to see an HD version. If I were to choose some Genesis games, I'd definitely go with a lot of the RPGs. I think those deserve a lot more love. Ristar or Rister, whatever you call it.
I think a lot of those too, like let's say Phantasy Star 4, or like that one was ahead of its time in storytelling. I think a lot of people don't like it because it's too easy, but okay, there's that, and then there's like stuff like Shining Force. I think stuff like that would be perfect for mobile. I'm surprised they never went ahead and did that.
Oh, you know what? I completely forgot that Xbox Live Arcade had collections of Sega titles. Remember the Monster World one with Monster World 4?
Yeah, and they also have some M2 arcade games. They're technically Saturn, I guess. Yeah. But they had the Model 2 games for a while. I don't know how they did. They were there. Nobody really made a big deal out of it. I thought it was kind of weird.
Yeah. So, Sega has done it. Maybe they just haven't seen sales. Though I would have loved to see a Phantasy Star collection of all 4 games, as well as, any of the little weird spin-offs, and maybe even translate some of the games that have never made it to the US, like they did with Monster World 4.
How about I was gonna say get Phantasy Star Blue Burst on consoles with peer-to-peer servers. Like, you don't even have to rent servers. Just making matchmaking.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, that'd be great. Well, I guess the 2 questions I'd pose, if you want to answer them in the comments below, what do you consider Sega's legacy titles, and what games would you want to see re-released outside of the usual suspect? Try to surprise us. Go back to the Genesis era, go back to the electromechanical era, and ask for Periscope be remade in HD, as it's always
Turbo.
been. Turbo. If you'd like more Sega news, check us out at segabits.com. And also, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on all our social networks.